Hi, everybody. My name is Miles, and I'm with Peak Performers. We are here at Peak Performers, are a staffing agency that helps people with disabilities, chronic health conditions, and neurodiversities find meaningful employment. And I'm so glad to bring you to my weekly segment, Disability Weekly, where I have on many different guests with a variety of different lived experiences to talk about their unique perspective. And today's topic is so important to me because oftentimes life disruptions happen. They happen for a variety of different reasons that oftentimes may be medically related and may not be. And yet, oftentimes, these individuals are those that experience the greatest barriers to being able to re-enter the workforce. I've seen it again and again pop up in resumes in the form of career gaps. But today we're going to be talking not only about that, but we're also going to be talking about what it's like to actually have a life disruption. How do you rebuild yourself from that? And what advice would be given to those that are currently undergoing a crisis or life disruption and how they can pick themselves back up? It's a topic that's very close to my heart, and I want to welcome Carpenter onto the stage here. Kara, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Miles. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. By the way, I want to give our guests a heads up right now that we are actually doing a pre-recorded format right now. I'm out on PTO as of this moment, but please do take a second to drop into the comments a note introducing yourself, and please connect with the other guests that are joining us live. This is a great way to build community and find other people that are in and among the disability and chronically ill community. Such a good way to connect with like-minded individuals here on LinkedIn Live. So Kara, real quick, tell us about yourself. Who are you?
My name is Carpenter. I'm 35 years old. I live in Austin, Texas with my two cats. I have a degree in marketing and business. I've worked for ad agencies and remote-friendly companies since before remote work was very widely adopted. And 4 years ago, a chronic illness kind of unexpectedly knocked me off my feet, and it's really rewired just who I am as a person and the things that I go after in life. And I've joined Miles here today to talk about some of that stuff.
And I would encourage you to check out Kara currently on TikTok. Where can they find you on TikTok, by the way?
Yeah, I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube under the name Kara and the Chaos.
Awesome. Well, very good. So real quick, Kara, I want to dive right into the topic at hand, and that is of around life disruptions. So what is your story and what disruptions did you experience?
Yeah, so I experienced a severe illness called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. It's an illness that comes on typically unexpectedly and very quickly. And, just a note that sometimes references to Stevens-Johnson syndrome, or if any users Google this disorder, it can take quite a graphic effect on the body. So just a little bit of a trigger warning there for any of our guests. And at the time I was 31 years old, and I was working for the most incredible marketing, remote-friendly cloud company called Kion, Kion. And I was just a, normal marketing woman in her 30s. I had very stereotypical, normative goals, get married, have a family, climb the career ladder and have a lot of fun in life and go, always stay busy. And, then out of nowhere, I got a chronic illness that really knocked me off my feet, and now everything looks different.
Everything looks different. I think that's a good way of approaching it, because sometimes there is, you don't know what life is going to hold. And I think it's important to point out too that within the disability community, I joke that this is called the mafia threat, that if you don't have a disability yet, you're going to acquire one at some point in time. Just you wait. And I think that resonates because especially when it comes to chronic illness, like these kinds of things are so unpredictable, and they can affect any of us and probably will affect many of us at some point in our life as well.
Yes, and I'm happy to talk more about like when I initially got sick and what that was like, if you think that's something that people on the show want to hear about.
I would actually, yeah. So I would love to a little bit more detailed stories about like exactly what happened, when it happened, kind of like the timeline of events that has led you up to right now.
Yeah, so it was the week of Thanksgiving, fall of 2021, and life had felt kind of stressful, a bit busy, and my favorite way to kind of reset was usually to take a trip of some kind, was usually some sort of hiking or backpacking adventure with my brother. I was the kind of woman before I got sick that loved to push my body
Mm.
to its limit. It was like with my brother one time, we did the Mountain Loop in Big Bend, which is a 3-night, like 30-mile, no cell signal. You got to get a backcountry permit thing. And I qualify it as type 2 fun because you're actually kind of miserable and have blisters and getting rained on the whole time. But in retrospect, you always think, oh, I'm so proud that I did that. So that was the kind of person that I was. And yeah, those experiences were always like humbling and always made me realize like, oh, I can do this. I can push myself to this level. So I'm capable of anything. And so we went on a backpacking trip in the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas over Thanksgiving break. And I took, you got 3 days off or something like that from my corporate employer. And I said, I'll just be out 2 days, everybody. And I had, my computer on my work desk still logged into Notion and Canva and Asana and all the things, saying I'll get back to these projects on Monday, everybody, guys. And then I never came back because when I was on this backpacking trip, I started developing flu-like symptoms and some blisters on the inside of my mouth. And we were thinking, well, it's hard to know what's what when you're camping. You're roughing it. So we were having some weird hypotheses. I was deep in the Arkansas woods thinking maybe I got some poison ivy inhalation. I accidentally, used poison ivy, traced logs on my campfire. I mean, the hypotheses were very odd. I was kind of shaking and projectile vomiting, and it just coughing a lot, and it seemed to not be getting better. And it's hard to kind of think clearly when you're in a 30-degree weather sleeping on the forest, and so we were like, oh, if I just get out of the elements, if we go find a cheap motel, if we spend an hour to drive out of the national forest, because it takes a long time to drive out of forest, everything will be better. And I did not get better. I got progressively worse in a really, really short time frame. So I'm talking like hours to maybe 24 to 48 hours from symptom onset to this person is experiencing a near-death experience, all hands on deck, call the life flight plane. That's kind of how quickly things progressed for me. So I went to a freestanding ER and they told me that I tested negative for strep, but maybe I had something like strep and to like go home and use a humidifier and sleep it off. And I went back to the motel and stayed up all night, like sitting in the steam from the shower. And it was feeling like I was swallowing razors. And then I showed up at a bigger hospital the next morning because when I don't get taken seriously in life, I pivot. I'm not going to waste my time typically with people that aren't getting a message. I will move on to someone that gets the message. And at this point, my skin had started to turn red and I had kind of more blisters. And I think I had an elevated heart rate. I had 102, 103 fever. was totally stoic. And I just showed up at this hospital and I was like very calm and said, can you guys help me? And they rushed me back immediately. And I was like, wow, man, I am just such an effective communicator. Look at that. I said, help me. And they didn't even ask for my insurance card. I have a bed within 5 minutes. I got to leave these people a good Google review. Fast forward several years, I can now look back at that time and think, oh, wow, I was in shock. Oh, wow, I must have looked like I was not feeling too hot. But, in that kind of survival mode brain, I thought I was, just a skilled communicator, that strategic communication degree coming into play. And then I progressively got worse by the hour. I think by hour 2 of being at the hospital, my whole world went dark and I lost all of my eyesight. I just to fast forward, I have some functional vision loss, but I've regained the majority of my vision. So I am able to see during this podcast and stuff and see Miles' face and everything. But yeah, that's how quickly my life changed on a dime. And that's how quickly anyone's life can change on a dime. And it took 3 or 4 days and a lot of phone calls and a lot of tests before anyone had any idea what was going on with me. And so I kind of just rapidly declined in a hospital setting really, really quickly. And then they finally said, oh, we think she has Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which I had a more severe and progressive and rare version called toxic epidermal necrolysis. The difference between SJS and TEN is just the percent of your skin that's involved. So SJS or TEN is most commonly considered an allergic reaction to a pharmaceutical. So people can be allergic to pharmaceuticals. There's ones that are higher risk, but it's all kinds of pharmaceuticals. SJS occurs in children from over-the-counter Motrin and Advil, and I just happened to get unlucky and get a 1 in a million rare disease that came on very, very, very quickly, and it essentially causes sloughing. So the layer of wet tissue and lining that's all on the inside of your body and under your skin sort of sloughs or sheds off. So it's actually treated in a burn unit alongside, people that have had chemical burns or house burns or other kind of skin injuries. And so I was picked up in the middle of the night in Arkansas, and a plane came and took me to Houston, Texas, where I spent a month in a burn ward. Had to make my own will because I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. Had to communicate with my employer about what was going on, had to be on a ventilator. And, long story long, I survived. Here I am. Now I am, designing a career and a lifestyle for myself that's focused around advocacy and kind of being the change that I want to see in the world.
I love that. Thank you, Kara. And I appreciate you sharing the story, being vulnerable, and talking about that, because oftentimes within a workplace, we don't know how to talk about illness. We don't know how to talk about career disruption. We don't know how to talk about the hard stuff.
No.
We don't have
No.
language, or it might not be deemed work appropriate and stuff. So I guess I'm curious, how can we change that? Because I feel like so much of the conversation, I have a particular rule that no matter what happens to me, I never say I'm sorry, because I feel like that more often than not shuts down the conversation and says, I'm not ready to listen to you and I'm not ready to absorb this information. And that's just my own personal hypothesis, but I feel like it makes me a better listener. And I wanted to ask, what can we do to actually have better conversations within the workplace, within people that we might work alongside 8 to 9 hours a day, to talk about the hard stuff?
I think we need to start small. I think we need to start small. How can we break down these conversations and make them as small and approachable as possible?
Mm.
One, this is kind of an aside, but one question that I get triggered by is, how can I help? What can I do for you? Because when I am in crisis or when I am having an active health issue, that kind of activates my crisis mode, and I am in problem solving mode. You know, what are the next steps? What are the plans? It's really, you know, crisis planning, strategy mode, all that kind of stuff. And if someone says, how can I help? I think, you've just given me another problem. You've given me another assignment when, you know, my inbox is overflowing, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what I would love to see is people ask me maybe how my illness is showing up today would be really, really helpful. That would help make me feel seen. I have autoimmune issues now, after kind of the ordeal I went through, the stress of it, or, you know, some also probably my genetic markers mixed together with, you know, a lifetime of being a people pleaser. Boom, perfect recipe for autoimmune illness after surviving SJS. And so I think at the core of a contributing factor for autoimmune illness is being a people pleaser. And I'm not sure that there's anything that any situation in my life that I've felt that show up more than in the workplace, where we are almost conditioned to be people pleasers. And some of my autoimmune illnesses, they appear invisible. You can't necessarily see them. I'm 5'8" and blonde, and I like to engage with other people. You just think that I'm warm and personable and healthy, not like this is a girl that is struggling and suffering so much that she's at her limit, sometimes just trying to make it through the day. Even though I got my eyesight back, I actually wear these giant scleral lenses on my eyes. They're custom made, like $10,000 contacts. You might be able to see the edge of it. And so I have severe dry eye. So just looking at screens or trying to make it through the workday, there's tension in my body just trying to hold on to that. And so if someone looked at me and said, you know, how is your dynamic disability showing up for you today? Well, earlier this morning, I was on Slack and someone was communicating with a lot of GIFs. GIFs. Oh no, I don't want to start that whole debate right now. But,
we won't touch that.
the GIF had a bit of a trimmer to it, a bit of a tremble. And with just what's going on in my eyes and my migraines this week, I wanted to respond to this person's task request, and couldn't look at the message without getting seasick. And as a recovering people pleaser, it was like, oh gosh, I don't want to be an imposition. I don't want to ask people for one more thing, but that graphic is really making it hard for me to complete this task right now. But if someone had just said, how's your disability showing up for you today? Or like, what's going on, you know? And then I can be like, oh, the fan is pointed right in my eye in this conference room meeting, and I can't focus on the task of hand because there's air blowing in my face. Just giving me an opportunity to show up. And I use that as an example because I would guess if you were to ask me that Miles, that would feel like an approachable question, maybe one where you don't have to feel uncomfortable, like you're taking on my illness or like I'm asking for the world. I just am getting a chance to let you see me a little bit more.
I love that. A chance to see you a little bit more.
Yeah.
I was curious too, because you have dealt with a lot of things that many of us will go through at some point in our life, but especially in your 30s, like that's still very young for many people. For many people that haven't experienced it yet. What is it like, for example, to live in a hospital for an extended period of time or to regain your eyesight?
Well, when you can lose everything like that, everything everything means more. Um, I would say I'm more of a dreamer now. Living in a hospital for a month really put me in touch with my fantasy mind. I was in an ICU for a month during a pandemic, which we all now have collective PTSD from, if you've noticed. How often do you even hear people talk about a global pandemic that probably left millions upon millions of people with just PTSD? I mean, it's this entire time period of our society that we can no longer even really reference without getting triggered, when really that could be a contributing factor to why we're having all of these topics that are now going on: remote work, young people getting sick at alarming rates, is all of these conversations that we're not having. Well, I can't avoid having the conversation of the pandemic because that's where I got sick. That's where I spent a month in the ICU. We were on lockdown. So that it affected me in a way that I can't ignore because it's now altered the rest of my life. I mean, I remember just the hospitals being understaffed. I remember me trying to comfort nurses as they were comforting me because they were alarmed, and you would have newscasts blasting throughout the hospital with all of the, oh, another wave, another shutdown. I'm just sitting here on life support like, this is not looking too good. And what else? Oh, I wasn't allowed to have a lot of visitors, so I could have 2 visitors a day, but you couldn't change them out. So if my mom came, there was 50% of my visitors if she came to drop something off, you know what I mean? And they were visiting windows. And so that left me, a newly sightless person, in a lot of pain, in a near-death experience. I had a lot of time to sit around and think about what I wanted, what really matters in life, notice who was showing up for me, notice who wasn't. And so I went through a lot of audiobooks. Yeah. Maybe 20. I think that first year after I got sick, I listened to like 75 audiobooks. My favorite was Project Hail Mary. Beautiful, beautiful story. And it's so interesting because when as a society, we view people, or I had this bias of people on life support, that they're in some sort of comfortable coma-like thing where they're not actively suffering and not too aware of what was going on around them. And my friends that have had and survived the same illness that I have, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and we're put in medically induced comas and we're on ventilators for weeks. They knew what was going on, and the nurses that stuck out to them the most were the ones that would like sit by their bedside and talk into their ear, and they still have those memories. So it's just whether someone is like me, where I'm at right now with my health, and I just need someone to show up to my dynamic disability in a really small way and ask me if a little image or a fan is bothering me, to whether I'm on life support, right? Just how can we reconnect and ground ourselves to the humanness in all of that, right?
Yeah, so true. I wanted to talk a little bit about grief because within the concept in the space of talking about disability and chronic illness, there's often the discussion of grief. And I think on the other side of it, there is sometimes the discussion around pride, particularly around the neurodiverse community. There is a sense that my brain is different and I'm proud of it. But I think that grief is something that we don't often talk about, but I think is important too. So how do you reconcile your own grief with being in your 30s and maybe there's some things that you can't do and that you weren't expecting your life to shape out this way, but how do you also reconcile that with hope for the future?
I have a lot of old friends. You catch me with the 75 and up club playing Tai Chi or Mahjong on a Monday morning. I do not have as many 35-year-old friends or friends my own age as I used to. That's for sure. Right. And I along those same lines, chronic illness, disabilities, showing more respect and honor to seniors, this, group in society that normally gets completely passed over and looked over. No. Those are the people that know how to regulate their nervous system. No, those are the people that have experienced health issues. Those are the people that have experienced loss. And those are the people that helped guide me the most on this journey, not the people my own age. And so I've had to grieve that. Like, I just want to be a girl on a Saturday night hanging out at a dance hall with all the other girls her own age. But I had to realize that is now a very small piece of my life. And I can do that, but I can't go deep with those people. I can't necessarily fully show up to normative people my age and fit in the way I want it, because they can't fully hold me. And that's not totally their fault. It's a capacity issue. And maybe I could have some of those micro conversations that we talked about earlier, but where I'm going to get the most support from are my trusted advisors, my older friends. And yes, you asked about grief earlier. The greatest loss I've ever experienced in my life has been the death of my former self. And I spent a year dealing with that. I know I look probably normal, happy and healthy to people on the outside, but it did change my face shape. It did change my body shape. I do have, some scarring if you were to look at me in real life. I have these watery kind of oval eyes now or large round eyes from my scleral lenses that I wear to help me see every day. And after the ICU, I spent like a year at home recovering, and then I would show up in the same public places I used to, and I'd say hi to someone I knew and they wouldn't recognize me, and I'd have to reintroduce myself. I think my energy, my looks, just so much had shifted, like the level of shift that could give you totally different Myers-Briggs results. I mean, a really seismic shift. And so I spent a year thinking, I don't look how I used to when I looked in the mirror. I don't. I would look at old pictures of myself and I would cry and I would grieve and I would miss my former self. And one day I didn't even realizing it, and I just stopped doing that less and less. And my old self is not so much this person that I want to be anymore, because who I am now has evolved so much and has so much depth. I no longer look at pre-sickness Kara, old Kara, as this version of myself that I want to return to. It's this version of myself that I understand now better and that I feel a lot of compassion for, but not someone that I want to become again. And early on in my grief journey, I was like, oh, I'd give anything to have her back. And I don't want her back anymore. I just want to be me and who I am now.
Wow. Thank you. And I want to kind of leave talking a little bit more. We talked about colleagues and talked about being able to share at work or just in general, right? But what can employers do? Because I see this pattern emerge so often that somebody has a career gap and we don't know what's going on. But so often employers will automatically screen out those with career gaps. But then also like there's some friction with being able to support people once they hire somebody that has had a traumatic life incident or a disruption within their life. So what can they do to be able to better support the chronically ill community with reentering the workforce?
I think C-level suite, corporate entities, HR, we want to look at things as facts. We want to look at things as black and white, because sometimes maybe that's easier to act or less emotional or more black and white or something. But shut the computer, get a piece of pen and paper, sit with yourself for 5 minutes, log out of Notion and try and just like reconnect with the humanness of all of this. And I think that's a good starting point, because I've had to be I do user generated content and content creation and some different digital things online. And when I tell you, some of my most viral and impactful work has come from me taking an hour-long walk around the neighborhood, getting a really good idea, doing filming and scripting on the back of a receipt, right? And I think for someone that's neurodivergent or, a little bit creative or type B leaning, corporate wants to have all of these, use this approved tool list, use this thing, do it like this. And I think that can be soul crushing to people that have dynamic disabilities or are really creative or really neurodivergent, because we just need a way to show up that feels more authentic, organic, human, all of these things. And the company I was working for at the time that I got sick was a company called Kion. And did they have overarching policy in place in the case of an employee getting sick? Like, did they have long-term disability policies set up for their place that were absolutely instrumental? And did they have, short-term leave and we're well versed on that, and FMLA and all of these things that are necessary on a corporate level? Yes, they had that, but they took it so many layers deeper, and they really were just so human to me. And I will never speak a bad word about that company all of my days. I don't work for them anymore, but I'm still connected with some of their employees. And how they treated me when I got sick is such a powerful, healing core memory for me. So when I was in the ICU, what Kion did was they organized a card drive. They organized a card drive. They had people, and they were a remote first company, and they mailed out cards from all over the country and managed to get those organized and sent to me. So I still have a box in my closet. I mean, I could go grab it in 30 seconds. I'll never get rid of that box. It's a huge box. It is just stuffed with more cards than I even had number of friends, right? And so I didn't have my eyesight. Kion didn't even know the full in and out of what was going on. They just knew all of a sudden Kara's in the ICU. We don't know when she's returning. We don't know what's happening. And they chose to say, hey, we're going to show up anyways. And I understand that a business has deliverables, bottom lines, finances, structure. They have all of these things, and that they do need to be business minded, but like, can we layer in just a little bit more humanness and compassionness and relatability when things go awry and just shut the textbook for a minute, because that's what Kion did for me. And so my sister would come up during visiting hours and I didn't have any eyesight, and she would just read cards to me that my employer had written. And yeah, like you there's this societal thing where we associate chronic illness or a disability as a weakness. But even in that moment where I didn't have all of my senses, just the level of impact and feeling was so big. It was one that changed the entire trajectory of my life, and just feeling loved and supported in that moment could help me go on to continue to be the person that I want to be, that changes policy and impacts the world. So it's like, just because I was incapacitated doesn't mean that I didn't have real impact and feeling in that moment. And then Kion did a couple other things for me. They organized a donation drive for PTO policy days, where if you had, I guess you could only roll over so many days. I don't remember what the exact policy was, but if people had vacation days they wanted to donate, they could. And what that meant was that even though I couldn't work for Kion while I was, in the ICU and recovering for several months, so many days got donated to me. I got 100% of my salary for months and months when I wasn't working for that company.
That's such an incredible story. And it really speaks to how humans can come through for each other as well, too. Kara, this has been a really interesting and very enlightening conversation for me. So I appreciate you coming on. I know that I mentioned earlier that you are on TikTok and you're on a number of other social media platforms where you talk about your journey and talk about your experience. You also mentioned how you are starting an online community focused around chronic illness as well. How can people get connected to you?
Yeah, so I really just operate out of Kara in the Chaos on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I am kind of trying to build my own path forward instead of kind of fit into some of these corporate boxes that have not always worked for me. So I recently launched a Discord group for people suffering with dry eye. 50 million people, I think, in America have dry eye. We just launched a few weeks ago, and within like 3 weeks of launching, we already have 200 members. We already had our first corporate sponsorship, and we already had someone get sick in our group, and we donated like $700 to their sickness fund. And we really have a mission of being a more modern, uplifting support groups. A lot of the chronic illness groups can feel really heavy, so we're focused on connection, resources, forums, that kind of stuff. So I promote the Dry Eye Club, the support group that I run, through my online pages that can be found at Kara in the Chaos.
I love it. Thank you, Kara. I appreciate you coming on today. It's been good chatting with you. And thanks to everybody that is joining us live. Sorry I couldn't be here live with you in person, but please do make sure that you connect with Kara and join us next week for another Disability Weekly. This has been Miles from Peak Performers, signing off for now. Bye.